Hello, and welcome to another edition of Where is Chuck? As you can see, I'm standing in front of a building that looks like it may be a school. Here are some more hints. It's in a southern state. It's a famous civil rights historic site. A big event took place here in 1957, and it's the home of the Little Rock Nine. It's Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. My wife and I, with our children, had a chance to visit the Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site, and it was really interesting. This was certainly one of the events at the forefront of the civil rights movement. It was after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, and there's a really good video I'd like you to watch that talks about the federal action. It also will be followed by some of the Little Rock Nine and sharing their thoughts on what it was like during that time.
Until the 1950s, America was a segregated society with separate schools, restaurants, parks, and water fountains for blacks and whites. In 1954, the Supreme Court rules that schools must be integrated. Resistance to this ruling spreads through southern states. As 9 black students attempt to enter Little Rock Central High School, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus orders his National Guard to stop them.
My hometown was only 50 miles from Little Rock. We had a large African-American community. The schools were all segregated. It was a period, though, of basic calm and optimism in the aftermath of World War II. And I think that's really what laid the seeds of people wanting to have more activism from government at home and to do something about civil rights. After Brown v. Board of Education, Little Rock Central High School crisis was the first major resistance test. And I believed in integration, and so did my grandparents, and so did my mother. And I was appalled, but also surprised by the resistance that built up. I had just turned 11. Eisenhower was the first president that I felt that I knew and had a connection to. And my family were all Democrats, but we liked him. He went out of his way not to raise the country's temperature. When you know you have the authority to do something and you're determined to do it and see it through, then it's better to talk more softly. It's better to be resolute without being arrogant. It was the right thing to do. It had to be done. The courts had ordered it, and these kids had a right to an equal education.
For a few minutes this evening, I should like to speak to you about the serious situation that has arisen in Little Rock. Disorderly mobs have deliberately prevented the carrying out of proper orders from a federal court. This morning, the mob again gathered in front of the Central High School of Little Rock. I have today issued an executive order directing the use of troops under federal authority to aid in the execution of federal law at Little Rock, Arkansas. The very basis of our individual rights and freedoms rests upon the certainty that the President and the executive branch of government will support and ensure the carrying out of the decisions of the federal courts, even when necessary, with all the means at the President's command. Mob rule cannot be allowed to override the decisions of our courts. If resistance to the federal court order ceases at once, the further presence of federal troops will be unnecessary, and the city of Little Rock will return to its normal habits of peace and order. Thus will be restored the image of America and of all its parts as one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What came across to me was he just said he wasn't going to tolerate it. The Supreme Court had made a decision. The law of the land had to be upheld, and the kids were going to get to go to school. This was a huge strategic decision because nationalizing the Arkansas National Guard to stop Faubus from using them to keep the kids out, and then bringing in the 101st Airborne Division was pretty unprecedented in America. had President Eisenhower not done that. He would have basically said, Supreme Court doesn't really count if there's enough powerful opposition, that we can have two sets of laws, one for people who don't live in the South and one for people who do. It would have been unthinkable. And in the end, I think that's why he did what he did. He realized that as fraught with potential negative ramifications as his action was, the flip side was much, much worse. It was really the first time the country got to see him handling a crisis of the magnitude that he dealt with in his leadership in World War II. I learned a lot about how people who are determined to prevail do it without going out of their way to humiliate their adversaries or claim too much momentary credit. He knew that the record would be written in the legacy of the lives of the kids that went to school. And so he treated it in a much more matter-of-fact way than many people in the same circumstances might have. And it was a confidence builder, I think, for the rest of the country, too. People who were just looking on and had never seen anything like this before. Dwight Eisenhower made a decision that he had a legal, constitutional obligation that if America was going to be a nation of laws, he had to do this. That was a big deal. A lot of other politicians said the courts can say whatever they want, where are their police, where are their armies, where are their whatever. Eisenhower didn't do that, and he deserves our gratitude for it. Secondly, he used his federal power to advance the cause of equal opportunity. And even though we've had lots of ups and downs and the issue continues to roil the country, we were then clearly started on a path of equality before the law and increased contact with one another. That's really what kept the whole thing from sparking an enormous reaction that tore the country apart. And he did the right thing. He was used to making big decisions, and he made most of them right, including this one.
Every class I walked into that day, a contingent of students got up and left. And they said, we're not coming back as long as you're here. Teachers were afraid. I could see the fear. We were all afraid. Many of them offered minimal gestures of acceptance, smile here and there, but they were very cautious too, because the word was out. You could tell the word was out. If you are friendly to those kids, we will do things to you.
There were some classes that the teacher did not control the classroom. Mm-hmm. It was on an individual basis as to how good that teacher was, right, as to whether they can control those bad apples.
My English teacher, and I can't remember her name, but it would be easy to find in the records. She was so terribly unwelcoming. She said to me one day, why do you want to come to our school? Why don't you go back to your own school?
The rest of the night, I saw a couple of us at lunch. And the rest of the time, you were all by yourself, going to your different classes. I didn't share one class with another black person.
I was in gym with Minnie Jean, and after she was expelled, they put Carlotta in my gym class. I think all the boys probably were in the same gym class. And then we would see each other at lunch, and people wouldn't sit at tables near us. Mm-hmm.
You were, going to be hassled in phys ed. That was a place where you braced yourself for a whole series of things, from throwing hot towels to broken glass to, a lot of verbal abuse.
If somebody threw the baseball when I wasn't looking, they could always say, well, he was on the team. He should have been catching the ball, whatever. There was always this. And there would be support for that version. Other classes, I had to be constantly vigilant and watchful because all sorts of things would happen. And you could never be certain that any appeal to the teacher would work. This English teacher, case in point, you know, she never saw anything. And I would say, this happened and that happened. She said, I didn't see it.
I said I'd never forget Mrs. Pickwick, I think is her name. Anyway, she was the dearest woman that ever lived, because it was only in her class every day that I felt safe. She was very tiny. But anybody who walked near me, she'd say, no, 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 you move over here. And that was from the first day I was ever there. From that first Monday I went inside the school and had to be pulled out. This woman was a tower of strength.
My algebra teacher, again, I can't remember her name, but a woman who said to the class when I first walked in, there will be no nonsense in this class. We're here to learn algebra. And that was so nice, because it meant I could relax in her class.